Okay, I think we're ready to start. The big autocorrect, leading in times of ambiguity. Huge thank you to our panelists for being here. My name is Shala Burroughs, and I am the COO of Status Group. And I think we're just going to go down the line, and if everyone can introduce themselves by your name, your company. And we're going to do something a little bit different for this panel, which is each of the panelists are going to introduce themselves by citing one of the hardest decisions they've made in their current business. I think, it's very easy to think that those who have the branding and the cash behind them have this very easy life. And my hope is that you can see into a few of the tougher decisions that our panelists have had to make to really grow their business and to keep them on the straight and narrow. So with that, I'll hand it to you, Arthur.
Thanks, Shala. My name's Arthur Brock, and I'm with Holochain, which is one of the coolest crypto projects you've never heard of. We're based all over the world. We operate out of Gibraltar. And in terms of hard decisions, actually, one of them came right on the heels of our ICO, where there was a miscommunication between one of the people marketing and producing the ICO and a big supporter who was drumming up lots of interest and who had done a lot of blockchain projects and thought that they could do the kind of wheeling, dealing, backroom deals, but ours was like just a smart contract. You could only get stuff out of it in the ICO, and they sent us 3,000 ETH after the ICO, thinking that they'd had an arrangement to buy our token, and we had to confront, do we take a huge chunk of our pool of the token, and pay them out of the expectations that they had from the miscommunications that occurred with one of our people and things lost in spam filters and stuff. And we ended up really, standing behind our employee that made the mistake, but it was a really tough financial decision to make.
I can imagine. Thank you.
I'm Lily Liu. I'm an angel investor, advisor largely in the crypto space these days. We had a company called Earn.com, which we sold to Coinbase last year. And so I was with kind of 21/Earn for a total of about 3 years. And 21 so we kind of inherited this company called 21, which was very well funded and one of the largest fully integrated Bitcoin miners at the time. Until the last crypto winter struck and really just sort of obliterated the economics of being really a miner outside of China, and certainly being a full stack miner unless you were either in China or Bitfury. So we inherited this company in May of 2015 that had done very well and had raised a whole lot of money before the economics of Bitcoin mining became clear. And before sort of the price started to go through the floor while the hash rate went through the ceiling, and we had the situation where we had about -80 in long-term liabilities, about 30 in cash, so -50, no working product, and about 6 to 9 months of runway. So that was it was not the clearest choice to make to even elect to inherit that. But we were able to get ourselves out of that situation. The company was sort of like this Thessian ship where was hardcore Bitcoin miner, and then we pivoted entirely into a software company that was basically initially like a paid LinkedIn, and then really a way that you could sort of sell and monetize minutes of your time, and then we're able to exit that. So everything kind of changed in the intervening 3 years, but for a long period of that time, it wasn't very clear exactly how it was going to turn out. But for some reason, we just kind of had faith that we could do it, and we were going to kind of make it work somehow, and it turned out okay in the end.
Hi, my name is Sam Cassett. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Consensus, which I think you all know. And Consensus obviously is an anchor of the Ethereum ecosystem, and we have to make decisions that are in line with that viewpoint, right? And so one of the questions that we talked about on this panel, and I'll talk about it more later, is how do you deal with uncertainty? And it relates to the hardest decisions, right? But I actually think in the beginning of Consensus, things were a lot harder in uncertainty terms than they are now, right? Like we weren't sure if we would all go to jail even for even writing smart contracts and deploying the things that we did. And so, the market shape always needs to dictate what a company like Consensus looks like, right? Because we do take up and fill out and support broad swaths of the market. And so, when the market changes shape, sometimes it changes shape in a good way. Sometimes, the 2017 happens, there's so much excitement, people are willing to explore a lot of avenues. But sometimes, markets contract. Some people decide that certain things like token launches aren't as interesting, et cetera. So, and meanwhile, you devoted all these resources to going down those avenues and making sure that we're doing R&D and developing EIPs and giving all that to the market. So, when the market changes shape, what do? Right? You don't want to cut muscle that you've built in this big organization that's important to the ecosystem. And at the same time, you need to double down on what is important, right? And so there's this really I won't go too into boring stuff like this, but there's this really famous Harvard Business Review article from like 1997 about leading in uncertainty. That's really famous. And what some managers do is and we don't have managers per se in Consensus, but what some people do is they double down, they get scared, and they don't make any decision, right? And that will kill you, right? And also assuming you know exactly what's going to happen will kill you. Because you could be wrong if you bet everything, you bet the farm on one avenue. So figuring out how to reshape yourself, which we just did at Consensus, we've been making a bunch of announcements about Consensus 2.0, figuring out exactly how to shape that organization such that it rises up to meet the tremendous market demand from enterprises, governments, central banks, like Fortune 500 companies, that stuff that is helping the ecosystem move forward. But also things that don't fit the shape of the market anymore, getting rid of those things. Those are really hard decisions, but that's pretty normal to do in a company, and I think any leader always has that decision on their plate.
Absolutely.
Hi everyone. My name is Eric Voorhees, and I'm the founder and CEO of Shapeshift. My little 3-year-old Athena is here, so I'm going to say hi Athena real quick. So hardest thing that I've had to do in my career, and maybe one of the hardest things in my life, was the imposition of KYC on Shapeshift. So when Shapeshift started, we're a digital asset exchange, and we allow people to convert one kind of digital asset into another quickly and easily and safely. Safely meaning that we protect the actual users of the platform, so we don't take custody of their funds. And when we started, we didn't take their personal information either, both of which were important to actually protect people that we care about. And it was always a legal gray area of how possible it was for us to do that kind of thing. And as most of you probably know, in the fall, we imposed KYC on Shapeshift, so now everyone that uses it needs to give us their personal private details. The reason that this was the hardest thing I've ever had to do was because I am ethically opposed to doing that. So I was essentially put in a position where I felt that I needed to do something morally wrong in order to allow the company to persist, in order to prevent myself from going to jail. It's a really awful position to be in. And I think as we build this industry and as we build this ecosystem, we always have to be figuring out which fights we want to fight, because we need to be fighting this over the long term. And that was a big challenge. And it's been a challenge additionally because I can't really talk about it as much as I want to. Even talking about it adds legal risk and adds problems. Maybe someday I'll be able to do that. But that makes it even harder. And I think there are a lot of people in the ecosystem that were very disappointed and upset with me for making that decision. And I can't even explain to them really why it happened. So that's been rough.
So Eric, you hit on something which I think is really abundant in this industry, which is developers especially come and are ideologically passionate about a certain vision that they have. And so one of the questions I have, Arthur, you're dealing with this too, which is how do you how do you reconcile the ultimate expiration the ultimate expression of that ideology with reality and the practicality of actually going towards that particular vision with your developers?
Yeah, this has actually been a significant challenge for us in our own organization and company culture. If you sort of consider a spectrum of projects that are sort of money-oriented, focused on, you know, revenue, business, get rich, you know, type of opportunity of the market versus sort of we're in it for the social impact and change. Holochain is way over on the social impact and change end of that spectrum, and we attract a lot of people with very strong ideologies about what it is to, you know, run an organization like that. Like, it should be completely flat, and, you know, everybody should have an equal voice, and, you know, like those kinds of things, which make it rather difficult to actually run a business, be accountable for funds that we raised in an ICO, you know, things like that. And some of these people were able to recontextualize those ideals in a context of sort of a growth curve. Like, we are where we are at this stage. Part of where we want to be requires the tools we're building, and, you know, we can't already be there yet. And, you know, people who are kind of able to take that in as a growth trajectory as opposed to like a standard that we can measure ourselves against already at day one, we're really able to stay in the organization. And we actually had to let some people go who were not. And but the other thing that we also find is that there's kind of an ideological minefield in the space. There's people that come in with very strong kind of anarchist ideals or libertarian ideals, and I feel like we end up you know, running into those mines in our community chats and stuff quite a bit.
So, you know, Arthur mentioned that to realize that vision, you know, you had to let a few people go to actually get there. Consensus, similarly, is going through Consensus 2.0 and moving into, you know, the next stage of your evolution. So, Sam, I'd love to hear from you what you had to think through as you shifted your business and let some teammates go who had been with you since the very beginning.
Sure. So I think it's a little bit related to the last question, actually. And Consensus has room for all kinds of things in it because we're a very broad organization, right? We have Fortune 500 companies. We have, you know, projects that we're doing for central banks, implementing, you know, trading systems for them. And it takes a certain kind of person to do that. It also takes a certain kind of person to make like a TCR party, or, you know, some of the weird, more cutting edge kind of stuff that I think is more in line with the Denver vibe. And so I think there is room for all of that. For us, it's really more of a strategic decision about what lines of business and what we want the shape of Consensus to look like going forward. And we want both of those things, right? We want, you know, at the risk of sounding too crazy, we want normal people, right? We want the incumbents to start using this technology because we think it'll benefit the world, and we think this is the way everything's going, and someone needs to help them do it. And at the same time, we don't want to lose our identity of being on the bleeding edge of you know, decentralized finance, for instance, things that, you know, wouldn't have been imaginable even a few years ago. And a lot of the stuff I've seen here, for instance. And so what we've really done in Consensus 2.0 is kind of doubled down on both of those. Like, we have this notion that, I don't know how many people have seen like the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and Consensus Enterprise. We've released this idea of an Ethereum 2.0 stack, right? And this is representative of our work with Web3 Cloud, in partnership with AMD. It also is representative of our work with Pegasus and our own Ethereum client that we're building. And the idea is there's a vision for the future where the Ethereum 2.0 client, with all of the sharding and scalability, et cetera, that's planned for that, simultaneously this client can sit and do all that stuff, and it can also sit behind a firewall or aim behind a firewall and do kind of internal network, private blockchains, private all kinds of topologies that look like crypto finance stuff behind there. And so we're really doubling down on making sure that we're the canonical stack of that. You can almost think of it like, you know, like Oracle, right? in the early days, they're the only ones who had a really good relational database. They're really good at selling it. We can sell services around that and make that the standard that everyone uses, right? And so that's our satisfaction of that avenue. And also at the same time, we're doubling down on the highest quality, best projects that are going to push the decentralization angle forward, and we do that through labs, and we do that through our venture investments as well. So I think we get to do the best of both worlds, but figuring out exactly what the shape of that was really hard. It was literally, dozens of people in a room arguing with each other for days, trying to figure that out, and we do that on a periodic basis, but that's kind of what it looks like.
So on the other side of the technological decisions, there are, as you mentioned, people who are going to either fit into that or not. And so, Eric, my question for you, you had to say goodbye to about a third of the Shapeshift staff, and I would say that cut heavily into muscle. And from a people perspective, as a leader of that organization, what are some of the things that you learned and some of the takeaways from having to do that with so many people who are really dedicated to the vision?
Yeah, so we laid off about a third of the company in early January. That came after about a month of planning and orchestration and trying to figure out how to do that and when and in what manner and all those kind of logistics. And ultimately, if you're going to be a company in the crypto industry, you are attached to the severe market cycles of this industry, and that is full of good and bad, right? We reaped the rewards of the crazy bubble in 2017, and we've had to deal with the declines of 2018. We have to navigate both of those without letting it get to our head too much. But I think what it's taught me, as with much in business, is that ideas that you have about what to do as a business are not nearly as important as the organization of people that you're able to build. Business is probably 90% just about the organization of people that you build around you and how you plan that, how you communicate within it. And my understanding of the importance of that as a entrepreneur, I think, has really become a lot more profound going through these kind of cycles, and realizing that the exciting ideas that happen all the time are really not what matters. It's really about the people that you build around you. And so, yeah, the layoff was extremely difficult. We wrote a blog post to try to convey sort of why it happened, what we did that we could have done differently, and also we wrote that post to help the people that we had to let go understand what happened, and so that they could point to that and understand that it wasn't necessarily that they were a bad person or something, but that to just give context to the organization. So that was a rough start to the year.
But there's much to come. There's hope. Lily, you had to make such a stark change from literally hardware to software, which is just a mind-blowing, 180 to actually usher a team through that. What are some of the lessons learned that you took away? What might you have done differently now that you've actually been through, steering a ship in a very different direction?
It was a task of necessity at the time. Because clearly the market for being this kind of full stack miner just wasn't there anymore, and it wasn't going to be, because the Chinese had come online and thrown the entire muscle of the electronics manufacturing supply chain into mining, and that was basically that, right? So what was tough during that time is we basically had kind of two battles that we had to fight, and we had to do it all very quietly, right? So one was, somehow all of the news had gotten out that a lot of money had been raised, and at the same time, things just really didn't look good from a financial standpoint. So we had to go through, a series of negotiations, basically do a workout, which is a skill set which is very well practiced in sort of, the world of LBOs and sort of that end of kind of the business spectrum, but it's not a skill set which is as sort of practiced in the venture world. So we had to do that, recap the company, and sort of try to do right to the extent that we could by our investors, and at the same time think of a completely new product that would actually be relevant to the market, right? So it was kind of like starting a new company, but starting from -50 rather than 0. And kind of having to deal with two very complex situations at the same time. So I think that looking back, it was not really an easy time. It didn't really have very clear answers. I think that the team actually did a pretty good job of navigating that, and we were lucky enough to have had a number of really great people on the team that really came in at clutch moments in order to sort of get that next product across the line, right? And sort of have that kind of next stretch of mile in the tunnel as we are sort of searching for an exit from that experience. And so I thought that was done really well, and I think that generally the team was really actually fairly positive, surprisingly, when there were plenty of reasons not to be. And so, in the end, I actually think that for the situation we were in, it was one of the sort of best teams, really positive attitude, and really well, and credit to Bology for having managed that very well. Yeah.
So my follow-on question to that is, how did you keep yourself and others positive? How, and more broadly, after Lily's given her perspective, I'd love to hear from you all about how you're keeping yourself emotionally grounded during an extremely volatile period of time.
We just knew that it was kind of do or die, right? We just had to get it done, and we had to find a path. There was really no other option. And so, actually, interestingly, you sometimes have greater solidarity during those moments because you're, as the team, you really just have to figure it out. And so some of the more sort of corporate stuff was really the focus of a smaller group of people. And we literally would, sit in a war room for like hours every day and just try to find a solution, right? And we spent hours, in each other's homes, early in the morning, late at night, trying to find a solution. And what we also did is we kind of segregated that kind of the corporate stuff from the product side. And so we did our best to kind of shield the vagaries and the ins and outs, what might not happen on the corporate side from everyone else, so they could really focus on product and really focus on sort of trying to build something great and realizing the product vision that we wanted to have as a company, which is equally important because that's kind of that was a momentum that kept us forward, and that was pretty important with kind of managing how people spent their time and energy as well.
Are there any other tips from other panelists about how they thought about kind of shielding parts of the organization or leading them through times like this?
I just want to point out that pretty much all indicators except the wildly fluctuating crypto market price are great. Like we have more Ethereum developers than ever. Like it's an up and to the right graph. We have more governments and big companies taking us seriously than ever before, right? It's, you can talk to a random person on the street, I bet they've heard the word Ethereum. That wasn't the case like a year ago, and it definitely wasn't the case 2 years ago. The customers, the quality of entrepreneurs that we see, that we invest in throughout Consensus's business are all increasingly getting better and higher, and the level of professionalism is increasing. This market is like maturing, and I think operationally there's really not that much different for us than there was a year ago. And in fact, I think market cycles tend to generate news, which brings even more people to come look at what we're doing and realize that it's amazing. So, except for that one number, like everything's great, and I think it's easy to lose sight of that if people feel all depressed. But everything's good.
One of the things I've learned in life is that if something looks messy or difficult, you can almost always zoom out from that far enough and things will start to look peaceful. And so that principle, I think, is really important in business, and especially in crypto. If you look at the market cycle that you're in, it can be very difficult and stressful, but if you zoom out, you see unmitigated success there. And I think for a company that has to deal with all that, the way you zoom out is you remind the people that you're with why you're doing it. You remind them of the global and the historical context in which this entire ecosystem has developed, why it's important to have an open financial system for the planet, and you remind people the importance of that. If you do that well enough, I think it starts helping people understand that the day-to-day struggle, even if they're really severe, are really nothing compared to the stakes that we have to get this right and to do an important job with it. So zooming out and reminding people of that context is something I found to be useful.
So, it seems like down the line, everyone's really positive, as am I. I'm biased, though, about where the industry is actually going. What are the 2 to 3 things as you think about bringing normal people in, right? Like, the crypto equivalent of a Starbucks on every corner. What are the 2 to 3 things that you all want to see in the industry that will actually open it up and bring a new section of people into it?
For Holochain, we actually have a pretty aggressive strategy around that. We have another project called Holo. That's the project that actually did the ICO. Holochain has no currency. It doesn't need one. It's efficient enough. You don't need to pay people to run it. What Holo is basically an Airbnb of the cloud hosting space. Like, we're basically trying to make it be that you can run crypto apps and serve straight out to web browsers without running into the issues of gas and that type of thing, and being able to actually get the efficiency of this onto the scales of cloud computing so that we can have the hosting compete with that price, as opposed to computation and storage on Ethereum, for example, is very expensive. And so for us, this is part of a strategy of really being able to take this mainstream and let grandma use crypto apps.
I'm excited about, I think there's a couple of things within sort of broadly this category of decentralized finance, which I think would be interesting to see, and I think that'll probably take root more in developed economies. And so I'm excited to see some of those applications take root here in America, Europe. I'm also excited to see a number of ways to make crypto sort of readily accessible to folks who live in economies where money doesn't work very well. I've heard of a number of efforts to make that happen, but when you think about sort of, this fundamentally is about money, and it's fundamentally about your ability to sort of control your own money and have agency. And I would like to see that happen more broadly, because that's, those are the more simple applications when it comes to cryptocurrency in those economies where sort of the everyday applications of this still work very well.
So I've got a few. One is Amanda Getterman, who's sitting in the audience, our chief marketing officer. When she first started working at Consensus, one of the things that she said was, I want to see Ethereum in MLB and Starbucks, right? Because that's how you know it's gone mainstream. And I think Bakkt is somehow doing it with Starbucks now. And also, there are lots of sports teams working on things. We've worked on some. I don't want to divulge, but that's happening as well. So that's one milestone, right? It's already hit the mainstream, and the gears are turning for kids. I saw a viral tweet the other day it was from like a 13-year-old who said, actually going to a bank is way more complicated to me than using like smart contracts, right? And there was, I believe it was a Goldman Sachs study like a couple years ago showed that 70% of millennials would rather go to a dentist than to a bank. So, to a physical banking location. So, when that generation that feels that starts using these tools and like using a DeFi application, getting something on compound finance, getting a loan from Maker, like when that's as normal and digitally native as going to a bank is to like my parents, I think that'll be a milestone, and I think we're getting there. And then I also think one big marker that I think we're pretty close to that I would love to see is a central bank issuing a cryptocurrency. I think depending on whether you view like the Petro as technically one, but I would love to see like a mainstream, I would love to see like a G20 central bank issue a crypto token. I think then we'll be like well on our way to realizing the vision. I
think a central bank releasing a digital currency will be really funny to watch because it will end up looking exactly like the fiat currency that we already have, which is already digital. It will certainly get headlines and it'll certainly bring a lot of attention, but it's not really going to be innovative or change anything.
I think it's a capitulation is more what I'm saying.
It's a sign that it's working. Probably what I want to see most is and this might be just like idealistic and ridiculous, but for normal people to start seeing the ability to transact between any two people freely and without centralized censorship as being as important and as justified and as ethical as the ability for any two people to speak to each other. And popular society is very comfortable with this idea that any two people should be able to talk openly, and that no one should be able to get in the way of that, and no one should have to license you to talk or should have the ability to prevent that communication from happening. The fact that money is treated differently is a huge injustice, and I'm hoping that crypto breaks that discrepancy and allows people to realize that communicating through financial interaction is as important, at least, and is as worthy of that same protection and that same sanctity as communicating through words.
Well, thank you. Huge thank you to all of our panelists so much for your insights, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.